What is going on, everyone? I'm back. Week 4 is in the books, and it is already time to turn our attention to Week 5 waiver wire pickups. Now, this last week was a huge week in terms of injuries to starting guys, especially at the running back position. And I would tell you, stay tuned in this episode because I'm going to touch on a lot of those injuries and a lot of the names that you should be going after for guys that are going to have big contributions now and moving forward. So with that being said, let us get right into it. Now, obviously, the first two names that have to be mentioned, in my opinion, are that of Latavius Murray and Jared McKinnon, and that is because of the Dalvin Cook injury, awful injury, non-contact one, tears his ACL, done for the year, and with that injury, the dreams and hopes of a lot of fantasy owners kind of went out of the window. But I'm here to tell you not to panic completely. Now, I mentioned two names, that of Murray and McKinnon, and I would say prioritize Murray. Definitely prioritize Murray because, after all, the Vikings gave him that big free agent contract, 3 years, $15 million. He should be the next guy up. And if you look at the carries after Cook went out, Murray had 7 to that of McKinnon, who had 2. And he also managed 21 yards, whereas McKinnon managed 0. Also, Murray had some opportunities in the passing game. Now, I will say, moving forward, I think Murray will have first down, second down carries, and red zone carries as well. Whereas McKinnon maybe has more appeal in PPR leagues because I think he will be that passing down guy. And I would say both these guys are warranting of pickups. If you don't get Latavius, go after McKinnon if you're a Dalvin Cook owner. Because there is no guarantee that Latavius will hang on to that role. McKinnon is more familiar with that offense, and Latavius has been dealing with some injuries. That is, after all, why Dalvin Cook won that starting role. So just keep those things in mind, and for now, this is just the best adjustment to an unfortunate situation. Now, if that Dalvin Cook injury wasn't bad enough, the already thin running back pool of candidates gets even thinner because Sunday night, Chris Carson, waiver wire darling of last week, and a guy who had separated himself from the Seattle running backs, goes down, fractured leg, and he's going to be on IR, and if I had to bet, he'll be out for the entire season. Now, look, as far as guys that are going to separate themselves from the pack and try to replace him, I think it's going to be in this order. Eddie Lacy, who had 11 carries for 52 yards in that game. Then I would put McKissic afterwards, who kind of came out of nowhere. 4 carries, 38 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 1 reception for 27 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Then I would say Rawls, and then maybe Procise, because I think he's 4th just for the reason that he's been injured, and I think that'll do him a disservice while all the other guys are still continuing to practice and get reps and get comfortable. Now, let's go back to the start of that list, though, with Lacy, because with Lacy, I think he will be getting the majority of that red zone work. I think he will be that first down, second down guy, and he was still getting some carries while Chris Carson was in, so maybe if you're looking for a silver lining as to why Lacy will be the next guy up. Unfortunately, he is not as agile. He is not as versatile as Carson. Won't be as big of a factor in the passing game, I think. But a guy that I also mentioned was McKissic, and look, kind of comparing him to Carson, I think this is a similar situation because initially Carson wasn't that big name, and he kind of just had some opportunities but made the most out of them. And if you look at McKissic tonight, he kind of did the same because he only had 4 carries, but he got 38 rushing yards and he got a touchdown from that. And he only had 1 reception, but he took it for 27 yards and another touchdown. So if there's anyone with the highest ceiling out of all these guys, it would be McKissic. So that's a guy that I would maybe target as that dark horse out of the bunch. If you don't land Lacy, I would go after him. Then Rawls. I like Rawls, but he wasn't even active last night. So for that reason, I say prioritize him third overall, and then, like I said, Procise, just because he's been injured, he'll be more of a factor in the passing game. I think he kind of falls last in that group of guys. Now, continuing our already lengthy list of running backs that you should target, I'm going to add another to that list in Wayne Gallman of the Giants, and he was the guy that was given a shot over Paul Perkins because Perkins, in the first 3 weeks, if it was possible to do less than nothing, that's what Perkins did. He was honestly just terrible. And Gallman had 11 carries for 42 yards and 2 receptions for 8 yards and a touchdown. And on the surface, that might not be that good of a stat line, but the Giants, like I said, have been so desperate at running back for a while that this is actually not a bad performance. And I think just because it was such a decent performance and Gallman made the most out of his opportunities, I think the Giants are forced to give him another shot. So I would guess that he's going to be again slated as the starter for next week. Go ahead, take a chance on him. The Giants, they're an explosive offense as long as Eli is given a chance to be protected, and with Odell in that lineup. They're 0-4, but Gallman was one of the lone bright spots. And moving forward, I think he has upside, kind of similar to what Carson did in Seattle, kind of just making the most out of a bad situation in the backfield. I think he is worth a waiver wire pick. Next, we have to touch on the Green Bay Packer running backs because, look, Ty Montgomery went down Thursday night, and there were a lot of various reports where maybe he had broken ribs, maybe it wasn't as serious, and now reports are coming out that it's possible that he'll play next week, but we don't really know. So I would say, just because of the uncertainty of the situation, target 2 guys in Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. Now, unfortunately enough, Williams also got hurt pretty much right after Montgomery, but I think his injury was less severe, and he's still worth adding. I think he can bounce back by the time they have their next matchup with the Cowboys. But the guy that really stepped up was Aaron Jones after both those guys were injured, and he had 13 carries for 49 yards and a touchdown. Now, if I had to guess, obviously he had an impressive performance, but I would say if Jamal Williams is available, I think he'll probably get the nod over Aaron Jones. But nonetheless, if neither Williams or Montgomery is available, Jones becomes a hot name to pick up, at least for this week. Now, we don't really know how long Montgomery will be out for. I personally think it won't be more than 1 week. So I think these are names that are going to be significant for pretty much just 1 week, but still, nonetheless, for those of you that are in situations where the running backs are at a premium, go ahead, add one of these guys. He can help you win at least this week's matchup. Next, I want to highlight Alvin Kamara, and wouldn't you know it, it's another running back on the Saints, but still. I would say at this point, Adrian Peterson is pretty much just a non-factor in that offense. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets released or traded at this point. That's how bad he has been. Whereas Kamara, if you look at his last game, 5 carries, 25 yards. All right, not that impressive in terms of rushing, but on the receiving side, 10 receptions for 71 yards and a touchdown. PPR leagues, great target to get. I think he reminds me of a younger Ingram, and I think at this point, the Saints are going to be riding that hot hand. And with Kamara, you know, he's got that power, he's got that elusiveness, and I really like him in the receiving game. Like I said, he's going to be more valuable in PPR leagues, and if he is still available on the waiver wire, he is definitely an addition that you should go after. I think he will be a flex guy, a decent flex guy moving forward. Now, getting to the last running back on my list of guys, and yes, that is how long this list has been, because that is how thin we are at the running back position this year. My next guy is Alex Collins of the Ravens. And look, we've heard a lot of names with the Ravens. We had Buck Allen, we had Terrence West, we had Woodhead. But now it seems like Collins is that next guy. He had 9 carries for 82 yards. He did lose a fumble, but still it looks like Buck Allen is going kind of out of favor a little bit. So I would say go after Alex Collins, maybe just for the next week ahead, but versus a decent Pittsburgh defense, he had a nice showing, almost 100 yards, so maybe not that big of a factor in the passing game, but I would say you can potentially have him as a flex guy, low-end flex guy. Go ahead if you're really desperate at the running back position, a name to consider. Finally now, making the turn to the wide receiver position, and there's a guy in Will Fuller that a lot of people kind of forgot about, but I would say keep an eye on because he came back from his injury and he put together a pretty nice stat line: 4 receptions, 35 yards, 2 touchdowns, and obviously it was in a game where the Texans put up 57 points, so a little bit of an inflated stat line, but I would still say he is the number 2 guy behind Hopkins, and he is worth adding. I think he has flex appeal, and it definitely looks like Watson is starting to pick it up and that Houston offense is starting to move in the right direction, so that is added value for a guy like Will Fuller. Now, I mentioned Deshaun Watson, and for this week, that is the quarterback that I want to shift attention to because he had the game of his life. 283 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and on top of that, a rushing touchdown. Insane stat line. And I would say I'm not too sure about having him as your starting quarterback moving forward. I think all quarterbacks at some point or another have a very nice performance, 1 or 2 during the season. I think this is probably that one for Watson. If anything, I would say pick him up and use him as trade bait because there's a lot of people that overvalue only weekly performances, and I think certainly that'll be the case for Deshaun Watson. If you can get him, I would try and move him. Maybe if you're thin at the receiver, at the running back position, and if you can get a decent guy in return, that is absolutely what I would do. Because those positions are at more of a premium. I think Watson, although he's been very impressive, don't get me wrong, he's still a rookie. There will be some games where there are growing pains, just doesn't look that impressive, but at the same time, there will be those games like this week where he just plays out of his mind. But for now, I would say pick him up, and if you are thin at quarterback, okay, hold on to him, maybe as that bench guy, and if it's that bad at quarterback, I would insert him, sure. But I think right now, his biggest value is as trade bait. Next, as always, I want to include at least one tight end to add. And this week, it is Tyler Kroft of the Bengals. And look, Eifert was out, and Kroft was the next guy up because he had 6 receptions for 68 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, I do understand it was versus the Browns, and probably just exactly what the doctor ordered for the Bengals, but nonetheless, the Bengals do rely on AJ Green a lot and then their tight end. So whether that is Eifert or someone else, Kroft is the next guy up in this scenario. We don't know how long Eifert will be out for, but I would think even if he comes back, he won't be 100%, and I don't think they'll rush him. Very nice performance by Kroft, and I think they will try and ride the red hand, the hot hand, and with the tight end position being one outside of Gronk that is so touchdown dependent, I think Kroft is a nice candidate to be picked up and to rely on in that offense where if Andy Dalton struggles, he's going to look for a security blanket, and Kroft checks that off. And finally, getting to our defenses to add, it would not be a true waiver wire target list without at least one defense. And this week, I have got 2 defenses for you to target. One, I would say the Minnesota Vikings, if they are available. They will be playing the Bears, and the Bears have officially made their quarterback change from Glennon to Trubisky. I know it's a home game for them, and the crowd is going to be nuts because they're going to see their first overall pick in Trubisky taking the field finally. But look, I think Trubisky is a rookie, obviously, and although he did look good in the preseason, this is the regular season. That Minnesota Viking defense is legit, and they're going to want to come back and get a result after that tough loss versus the Lions. And I would say this is a very bad matchup for the Bears offensively, and I feel pretty comfortable, if available, taking that Minnesota defense. I think they're going to truly make Trubisky look like a rookie. Now, the other defense that I want to talk about is that of the Buffalo Bills, and man, they have looked impressive. They just held the Atlanta Falcons to a loss, 17 points. I think to me that's very impressive, and now they're going to be going up against the Bengals. I know the Bengals got a win, but before that, their offense was struggling, and unfortunately, I think it will probably return to those ways versus the Bills, and I think probably there's going to be some turnovers to be had. Andy Dalton is going to go back to some of the performances he had earlier this year. So the Bills, a nice target versus a struggling Cincinnati offense. So with that, this concludes my list of top 10 guys to add in waiver wire this week. Let me know, what do you guys think? Are there some guys that I forgot? Are there some guys that you would exclude from this list? Do you agree with the guys that I mentioned in the analysis I gave? Let me know in the comments. Feel free to ask whatever questions come to mind. And as always, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.